TD Insurance, you could save when your claim's free, which is great if you're a safe driver. Not so much if you're a tow truck driver. You could save up to 30% on car insurance when your claim's free. Feeling good about saving when you drive safe. That's what confidence feels like.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Andy Haken, and I have the privilege of serving as the 19th President and Vice Chancellor of St. Francis Xavier University. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event from Mulroney Hall, located on the campus of StFX, and more specifically from inside the replica of the Prime Minister's office as it was during Prime Minister Mulroney's tenure. Officially opened in the fall of 2019, Mulroney Hall is an outstanding addition to StFX. It serves as a hub for academic activity and is the home of the Brian Mulroney Institute of Government. It is the home of future leaders. Tonight we have a very special evening planned for you in which our former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney, will be interviewed by our very own Nancy Reagan. In tonight's event, entitled Post-Election Fireside, the former Prime Minister will speak about the US election, its global impact, and his predictions for Canada-US relations in the future. The times in which we are living are clearly a moment in which new levels of incivility have surfaced across the world. In a highly connected society, we cannot isolate ourselves from these events. And so how do we respond? At St. Francis Xavier University, we aim to teach our students about careful, critical thought, about how to dialogue respectfully, about how to educate and be educated, and how to speak with purpose after listening very carefully. We are a university that takes pride in shaping leaders, people who use their own skills and experiences to improve the lives of others, people who build a better society. And let us be in no doubt how important this is at this moment in our time as we try to navigate what are clearly unprecedented times. I'm delighted tonight to have two sovereign leaders here with us. Nancy Reagan from the class of 1988, who will interview the 18th Prime Minister of Canada, the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney from the StFX class of 1959. Now, to get things underway, I'd like to get a territorial acknowledgement. For those unfamiliar with this practice, a territorial acknowledgement involves making a statement recognizing the traditional territory of the Indigenous people who called the land home long before the arrival of settlers and who to this day still call it home. Such a statement may be viewed as an act of reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge that although members of our community are spread across the land, St. Francis Xavier University is in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship which Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik Maliseet peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. Thank you. Earlier this year in September, Nancy Reagan interviewed me about my new role as president of this great institution. Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce her to you. Nancy Reagan came to StFX from a family with a strong political roots to follow her passion and earn a Bachelor of Arts degree with a major in English. Nancy was a member of the graduating class of 1988. Many of you know her through the 15 years she spent as being the host of the CTV Supper Hour show Live at 5. She's now the host of a popular podcast called The Soul Booth. She is at heart a storyteller. She seeks connection and cultivates relationships through authentic conversation. I am delighted that she is so willing to devote her time and energy to keep all of us, as Zavarians, well connected. Nancy, I hand it over to you for the remainder of tonight's event. It's all yours.
I would say thank you, Dr. Haken, but you told me to call you Andy.
That's right, Nancy.
You look pretty good behind that desk.
Isn't this special?
It is pretty good looking, I'll tell you. I loved what you said about heightened incivility right now. And I think of StFX as the home of civility.
It surely is. And we have our job to do to produce tomorrow's leaders, Nancy. And we've got to keep our eye on that ball.
We do. The other thing the word you used was unprecedented. And I chuckled thinking at the moment, it feels like we're unprecedented.
More commentary on that later tonight.
and that's what we're about to talk about. So thank you, Andy, so much. I hope you're having fun in your job.
I certainly am, Nancy. And thank you again for taking this on. Best of luck tonight. And hello, Mr. Prime Minister, as well.
Delighted. All right. Thank you so much. I'm just so happy to be with you all tonight. This has been a stressful week, and it feels like it's really a great thing to gather with friends from StFX. I'm really excited to speak to the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney. I'm going to give you just a little bit of an intro, but the public, of course, knows him as the 18th Prime Minister of Canada, but Zavarians know him as one of us and a superstar Zavarian at that. The Prime Minister's public service spanned over 50 years, and he truly earned a reputation as a fearless leader. And what you need to know is that fearlessness started at StFX, even in his first year. At StFX, he was not only an excellent student, but also a champion debater. And in his 4 years at X, he and his team never lost a debate. Can you imagine? We're going to talk later tonight about how his time at X shaped his career. But before we get started, I have to mention the Brian Mulroney Institute of Government. If you haven't seen this facility, this building, you have to make it a priority because it is absolutely astounding to walk through. It's world-class, it is one of a kind, and it's extraordinary is the only word I can use to describe it. It's also an extraordinary testament to his commitment to building an even stronger Canada by educating and nurturing future generations of leaders. As you may know, Brian Mulroney raised $100 million to develop that building, and also for scholarships and bursaries, to raise money for academic positions and research. And it's such an accomplishment, standing there beautifully representing what he has meant to StFX and to Canada, and how he continues to be in service. So that's one of the things I want to talk about. I could get into his CV, but in order to go through even the highlights, it would take as long as it's taking for this US election. So I am going to trust that you know who we're talking to tonight. And the old adage, he needs no introduction, I think really holds true, especially among this community of Zavarians and friends of StFX. So I just want to say right now, I am proud and delighted to introduce the 18th Prime Minister of Canada, the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney. Prime Minister, are you there?
I'm here.
Oh my goodness, you certainly are, and looking good.
Well, thank you.
But you know, the first thing I've realized is I don't have a poppy on.
Well, I'd share mine with you, but it's kind of difficult.
Thank you. Well, I take, you know what, it's the thought that counts. We've talked about this, evening a few times over the past month, and I've just so been looking forward to it. No one knew what to expect of this American election. And I guess I want you to imagine if you were a surgeon and the US election was the patient, and you were coming to tell us about the condition of the patient, what would you say? How is the patient doing, would you say?
Give me a few days and I'll tell you. Because I think, Nancy, when the university dreamt this one up for you and me, I guess everybody thought, I certainly thought, that a day or two later, by the time we talked, there'd be a decision. But there isn't. But I guess we're going to have to go anyway on the assumption that somebody is going to win. And that'll take a couple of days. But, you know, we're going to have to kind of agree in some way that, that both can't win. And so the way it looks to me now, with the developments and the polls closing now quite favorably for Vice President Biden, I'm going to try and respond with a huge caveat that we don't know what the answer is going to be tomorrow. I may be embarrassed by all of this, but my guess now at this late hour is that Vice President Biden, is just about a certainty to become the next president of the United States. And so for any, we'll talk about President Trump, of course, and Vice President Biden, but if the context for me will be the almost certain election of Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm. What did you expect when you and Mila sat down to watch the election on Tuesday night? What were you expecting?
I was actually expecting a Biden victory, and I thought it would be a rather substantial one. But one of Trump's great skills is his campaigning skills. I mean, he's the greatest campaigner that I've ever seen, with the exception of John Diefenbaker, who was the greatest Canadian campaigner. That 58 election where Diefenbaker won his huge majority was something to behold. And Trump's rallies, which I thought were dangerous given the illness factor, obviously had a beneficial effect for him, because it ginned up, you have every 2 or 3 days times a day, you have a rally with 30, 40,000 people. This is extraordinary. And while I would have opposed it, it was successful in that it ginned up his people to such an extent that he got every Republican in the United States of America out to vote. And I thought that that's what saved him from permanent damage. And it made it very close. But I think that's one of his great qualities, that he was a tremendous campaigner. But I thought that Biden played it, and his team played it very well. He's no longer the Joe Biden that I first met 35 years ago. Of course, he could say the same thing about me.
35 years ago. Wow. Yeah, we're going to get into that.
Yeah. And I think his team recognized that the time had passed and he had lost perhaps a little of his fastball. So they were very clever. They low bridged him. Mm-hmm. And they put him in his basement. And which is not a bad strategy if you consider that the basis of the strategy just had to be, we are going to avoid an election with President Trump, but we're going to make the election a referendum on President Trump. And we're going to put him out there with all his ego and all his errors and his comments and his vindictiveness in the full light of dawn, and let the American people judge, not me, Joe Biden. I'm a good guy. Everybody knows I'm Uncle Joe. I'm a good guy. And everybody knows that. And it's true. He is a very, very nice guy. But we're going to make this a referendum on Donald Trump and his failure with the pandemic and his personality and so on and so forth. I've always thought that leadership had two fundamental components. One was substance, and Trump has done in his own way fairly well in that. The Middle East peace that no one could bring about for 75 years. He's into it and doing very well. His tax changes, his record unemployment for minorities, for Blacks and Hispanics, and so on, is quite good, you know. And so on the substance, he had a case to make. But leadership is both substance and style.
And style.
And this was a cropper. He came a cropper with this. You know, the attitude, the vindictiveness, the attacks. You know, the Washington Post has reported that in 4 years, he has come up with 22,600 lies. You know, this is just extraordinary. So this is what Joe and his colleagues managed to do, and I think it was a brilliant strategy. It's paying off.
I think you're right, but I also, you know, have to ask. I know I'm not the only Canadian, and I am sure there are a lot of Americans as well who have been kind of flabbergasted that after 4 years of that bombast and the lies and the obfuscation and the disastrous approach to the pandemic, that 68 million people were willing to vote for him. Does that surprise you?
It's truly, did it ever? It's truly astonishing. I mean, Joe came up with the largest number of votes somewhere in the neighborhood of 73 or 74 million in the history of the United States.
Ever, yeah.
And I can think of a lot of people that I would have thought deserved to come second. Yeah. But Trump wasn't one of them. I misread the whole thing. I thought that his that description that you just gave of him and his achievements, and I recognize that he didn't steal the job in 2016. He earned it fair and square. He won it, and he's done some good things. I acknowledge that readily. But on the way you just set it out, which is an accurate way, I thought that you know, he's a goner. Look, if anybody did in Canada what he's just done, and had the temerity to run for public office again, I want to tell you, if you know, the guys in the white coats would come after you pretty fast, and they'd have a powerful case against you. So no, this was that aspect of it was a big surprise. But you know, the Americans are a forgiving sort, but more importantly, I think, than that the country is totally and absolutely polarized. It is people don't respect each other. They speak ill of one another. Former friends. You know, it's interesting. We'll keep our eye on this later tonight, see what happens. I'll give you a small illustration of, if it happens, why it happened. Mm-hmm. John McCain, whom I knew well and I thought was a great hero, a wonderful man, great leader. And when Trump made the comment about him in 2016, that John McCain was not a hero because he got captured. McCain spent 5.5 years in a North Korean prison camp, was physically broken, his shoulders, his legs, and by the torture. And he went on to the career that he did. Well, Trump found a guy in Queens, a doctor in Queens, to sign a piece of paper saying he had bone spurs. Therefore, he needed a deferment, and he didn't even go to battle. When he said that, Nancy, just that comment, I said to Mila, this guy's a goner.
That's it.
He's finished. This is enough to discredit him totally. And not at all. He made the statement, he repeated it, maintained his policies against people. Well, what happened? What happened was that Cindy McCain, who's widely respected and loved in Arizona, that Cindy came out as the wife of the former senior senator from Arkansas, from Arizona.
Arizona, yeah.
And she came out and supported Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And guess what?
John McCain may get the last laugh.
Yeah, a real Republican state. And John McCain was an icon. they loved him and respected him, admired him, as they should. Well, guess what? Cindy McCain said, I'm voting for Trump. And here you've got them, a Republican state that goes Republican all the time. Here they're waiting tonight to see what Joe Biden's majority is going to be in Arizona. Just if he gets Arizona tonight and Nevada and nothing else, he's president. And so, as you say, both John and Cindy McCain must be having a little smile tonight, if that's the way it turns out.
I heard that President Trump's people counseled him to reach out to Cindy McCain during the election, and he said no, he wouldn't listen. But I would you agree that that's been one of his downfalls, that he won't take advice from his advisors? Oh
yeah, of course. Everybody knows that. You know, as I say, you know, I've known him for a long time and had friend. I'm not an intimate friend or anything, but Neil and I, we met them both in New York, and then we saw each other socially and that kind of thing in New York. And then I had been in Palm Beach. Neil and I had a home in Palm Beach for many years. And then Dalton, the president, then came down. He wasn't president then, and he purchased Mar-a-Lago. And so he was down the street from me in a symbolic way. In fact, you could take my house, entire house, and put it in Donald's kitchen. Lots of room there. But so we'd see him down there. He was always very polite, very respectful, kind to people, and he was well liked. And so I thought that when he got elected, that the influence of the Oval Office, the power of the Oval Office, and the responsibilities of the president were so enormous that when he sat in that desk in the Oval Office, he'd be saying to himself, well, you know, I better, like Ronald Reagan, who evolved into a great president, and George Bush, and everybody changes once they become president or prime minister or what have you, hopefully for the better. Not a bit. You remember his first day in office, he had his press secretary out complaining bitterly that the press was saying that Obama had a bigger crowd at his inauguration. And this is the way he began. And he said, so the press showed pictures of it and film of it. Obama had him 2 or 3 to 1. But he then embarked on this war with the media, which is another thing. And so it's been 4 years of battles and recriminations and vindictiveness, not a pleasant sight.
And there were so many moments like the one you describe where you said, oh, that's it, he's a goner. But there was moment after moment after moment like that through his presidency where I certainly thought, no, he can never recover from this. That's crazy. But he seemed to manage to hold on to that, not only that base of his, but as we've said, 68 million people voted for him. So let's talk about what you see as his accomplishments before we go any further, I guess.
Just before we do, that's because you talk about the leadership of the party and so on. He's not leading a party, and he never did. He's leading a cult. The Republican Party, there was a takeover of the Republican Party. Well, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, the other day said, told a journalist in Washington on the record, or speaking of his father-in-law, we organized a hostile takeover of the Republican Party. The Republican Party was traditionally free trading, world leader, but Reagan and Bush, for example, would lead in NATO, but with kindness and respect for all of the participants, including the Prime Minister of Canada. They would never say anything like he says regularly to his allies. He's abused his allies, and he's playing kissy face with the dictators in North Korea, Russia, and China. And yet the Prime Minister of Canada, he sent out after the G7 conference in Charlevoix, he was on his way to Singapore, Trump was. And he saw on the television, he saw Justin Trudeau making some kind of comment, quite innocent comment, quite frankly. He blasted it off a tweet from the Air Force One, and he sent his two key advisors onto the Sunday shows, 2 days later, onto the Sunday shows, saying Trudeau stabbed us in the back. He's a rotten bugger. We got to get rid of him. This kind of stuff.
Yes.
This has never happened before. You know, Nancy, I was privileged, very privileged, to work with Ronald Reagan, George Bush, and Bill Clinton. These were gentlemen. These were real leaders with strong personal relationships. And for example, in our case, they admired Canada. They knew the history of Canada and our sacrifices with the Americans, World War I, World War II, Korea, and they knew all of these things. Our friend now, Trump, if he knows them, he certainly doesn't acknowledge them. There's no kindness in his approach. Hell, he hasn't even made a state visit to Canada in 4 years. Usually the President of the United States, newly elected, makes his first trip to foreign affairs to Canada. Who did he go off and see for his first trip? Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia.
The crowd
I think he didn't want to stand beside Justin Trudeau for pictures.
Yeah, well, that's possible too, yeah.
But Prime Minister, so you talk about that dearth of leadership and how he overtook the Republican Party, but where were the voices? Where were the strong Republican voices saying no? It's like they were all on the boat and he was steering. Yeah. And I've been waiting this 4 years for some of them to stand up and say, no, this is not okay.
You know, Bill Clinton used to say that leadership, true leadership, is the capacity to look around the corner of history just a little bit. He was speaking about matters of policy. But that statement applies as well to the responsibility of party leadership when you see something going wildly awry and no one has spoken up against it. They know what was going to happen. They looked around the corner of history. They had to know what was going to happen. And when it did happen, they said nothing. No matter how egregious the policy or the air. Imagine locking up children on the US-Mexican border. There are 545 children who've lost their parents. They can't find them. Young kids between 3 and 7 years old. Now, how would you like to have that as a policy and then have the audacity and the lack of soul to defend that kind of a policy? I don't care if you're a Republican or you're NDP or you're liberal or conservative. I don't care. This is not a political thing. This is a human reaction. And how could you sit there at night watching television in the family residence in the second floor of the White House and see this on television and not get on the phone right away and say to the chief of Homeland Security, I want that changed tomorrow morning. I never want to hear of it again. Get rid of it.
Of course. And what about those Republicans behind him? Are you shocked that no one came out and said, no, we've got to right this ship?
Yeah, I was, I'm no longer shocked, but I was some years ago when it happened. I just found this was a truly appalling absence of leadership. It's a total abdication of leadership. It's like, to go way back in time, like as if we said at the time, Nelson Mandela, he's a communist. We're going to leave him in jail, which is, by the way, what some of our colleagues in leadership there said at the time at the G7. But, the fact that he could do this and not have his people do it and not react against it was a sobering moment for me in my assessment of the presidency and the Congress of the United States, leaders who stood still and kept silent while this kind of thing was going on.
Don't you think that both the Republicans and the Democrats are going to have a lot of soul searching to do after this election?
Oh boy, are they ever. Assuming that this works. the election unfolds the way we were talking about hypothetically.
Mhm.
But the Republicans, so Joe becomes the president, but the Republicans retain control, so it appears, of the Senate. And Nancy Pelosi loses seats in the House. How does this happen? This is a total infallible recipe for deadlock.
Straight jacket.
Yeah, you're going nowhere. When you see the problems that they have, and look, we all have problems. And, I think that the United States of America is the greatest democratic republic that God ever put on the face of this earth.
You said that at George Bush Sr.'s funeral.
That's right. That's right. I felt about then, and I do tonight. I watched the turmoil down there, and they've always resolved it in the past, but they've got an enemy now, as we do, that's insidious, and you can't find it, and you can't fight it properly. And it doesn't care whether you're a liberal or conservative or Republican or Democrat. This is the greatest challenge, not only to America, but to the entire world, because you can't get your economy back in shape when the population is essentially crippled by this kind of endeavor, this kind of initiative, and so this kind of illness. And so now one good thing, Joe Biden is not a vindictive guy. And when he says he works across the aisle, that's what he did in the Senate for 30 or 40 years. And Mitch McConnell has said very nice things about Biden, as has Lindsey Graham and people like this. I think that you're going to find a greater degree of cooperation and progress for the United States if Joe becomes president and Mitch McConnell stays there. They are going to move mountains together. They can, and if they wish, they're going to. So I'm rather optimistic about what may happen in the immediate future and the long-term future. The other thing that's happened is not widely mentioned, but in my assessment, another good thing that happened to Joe's, this left-wing crowd they've got there. And look, we're from StFX, a pretty left-wing when I was there,
Far left in the Democratic Party, yeah.
But it's just, I say just left-wing, not disparagingly, because the way it's used in Washington is very different from what I learned from the Cody, Monsignor Cody, all those years ago in Antigonish. That was a generous, thoughtful vision of development and policies that affect the underdeveloped world and so on. That's not what they mean. Mm-hmm. These there are 4 or 5 of them there. They call them the squad down there, and they imposed policies on Biden that almost defeated him. And they acted in such a way, riots going on in the cities, and they're out there encouraging the rioters. They're members of Congress, and that thing cost Nancy Pelosi a number of seats. The Republicans in the House actually gained seats. So you've got and people also, the Republicans, the Democrats really disgraced themselves in the way they treated these candidates for the Supreme Court. You can disagree with people without engaging in a battle, the politics of personal destruction. Mm-hmm. These people, like that young mother who came before them recently for the Supreme Court, which now brings the Republican control, if I can put it that way, the 6 members of the Republicans or conservatives and 3 members of the liberals. They could have stopped her or tried to stop her without, eviscerating her in public. Look, there are hundreds of millions of women around the world watching this and kind of proud of her, whether they like her politics or not. And I think that the images that those attacks against innocent people, simply to be partisan, turned off a lot of people, which has to be why they lost. The Republicans gained seats in the House and kept the Senate. And now they've got the Supreme Court as well. So both deserve some degree of opprobrium in the manner in which they dealt with this matter. But as I say, Biden is up. If he wins, he's up here. Mitch McConnell is there. Nancy Pelosi is there. I think they can do things together, good things.
So at the beginning of the conversation, I asked you to imagine that you were a surgeon. Now I'm going to ask you to imagine you're a marriage counselor, because you talk about that division and whether it's in politics or in public,
Yeah.
you know, people, if two people meet in the grocery store and one's a Democrat and one's a Republican, there could be a fight. And I want to know, if you were a marriage counselor, how do you bring the two sides that are so divorced from one another ideologically? How do you even start to heal that rift? Because it's going nowhere good fast.
You're right. Let me give you an illustration from this pandemic where, you know, to be together with your spouse in a home, that's a lot of togetherness for 8 or 9. You can't go out, you can't go for a drink, you can't have lunch with anybody. You know, this is quite a challenge for everybody. But I solved it, and I would apply the same philosophy to the challenge that you just put out, Nancy.
Okay.
I was asked how I did. I said it was actually easy. I said I gave Mila half the house, I took the other half, and our dog Hugo acted as the mediator.
Can we recruit Hugo, you suppose, for the American divide?
Yeah, he's just outside here. No, I think that it's a old basic common sense, and that is that, look, you get together, the president gets together with Mitch McConnell and says, listen, this can't go on. I accept responsibility. You've got to accept responsibility. President Trump is gone. For now, he's out of the picture. And look, let's do something to symbolize, set out a symbol of cooperation and respect and mutual admiration. Let's try and do that. So let's begin by bringing in a piece of legislation, major, that we both can agree on. We have enough time to fight over the trivia and trash of politics. But let's do something that's nation building. And I don't care whether it's, for example, this huge infrastructure project that America needs. And let's do it, and we'll name it after you and me or whoever, but both political parties. And if we're going to spend $7 or $8 billion on it, you're going to get the lead on half of this, and I'll take the lead on the other. We'll put it together under one national package that'll bring honor to the United States, get rid of this excessive partisanship, and send out a signal to the nation that, hey, we're back in business together. We're not going to act like this anymore. Americans are highly patriotic, and they're highly respectful. They're very kind and generous. Hell, the Americans have, in terms of philanthropy, they are extreme. They're the leaders in the world. When you go and take a look at Mulroney Hall over there, $100 million, I can tell you that there's some, wonderful Canadians who helped very much. Some of the great maritime leaders, who've done it, like Arthur Irving and friends like that. But a lot of it, money came from Americans, and they said, "Sure, I'll help you." How do you spell StFX, Brian? I say, well, look, here's the card. Just copy that down, and I'll thank you for your check.
That's a tribute to, that's a tribute to American generosity, but I think more than anything, a testament to your relationship building and your powers of persuasion. And I like to think you're right, that Biden is more like you and will be able to cross the aisle.
Well, when I was at it, Nancy, there was a group in the Senate: Teddy Kennedy and Chris Dodd, John Tunney, and Joe Biden. And they were called the Irish Mafia down there. And I spent a lot of time with them at different intervals. And Teddy called me up one night And he said, I was at 24 Sussex, and Teddy calls me. He said, I'm only calling you tonight, Brian, because I've got a big pile of news to give you. I said, what's that? He said, we had a caucus and we have elected you an honorary member of the Irish Mafia.
The Canadian branch.
Yeah, I was the only member of the Canadian branch. But that's like the time, Nancy, just to mention Teddy, he, after the 1994 senatorial elections, he called me and invited Neil and me and Caroline and Nicholas, our youngest, to go down to spend the American Thanksgiving with the family, Teddy and Vicky, at Hyannisport. And so we went down and we had a wonderful weekend, American Thanksgiving weekend. And we were out walking. It was pretty cold. And Teddy and I were out with Mila and Vicky and the kids. I said to him on the walk, I said, he had just come in. He had defeated Mitt Romney in the senatorial election 3 or 4 weeks before. And I said to him, Teddy, that's quite a performance you had. My God, you had such a popular vote. I said, is there anybody in Massachusetts who could ever defeat you? He thought for a second and he said, no, Brian, not really. There's nobody who could defeat me. Well, he said, Bobby Orr could, but he's a Canadian, thank God.
Oh my gosh.
He said, Bobby Orr could defeat anybody in Massachusetts.
I can't believe you just brought up Bobby Orr. That's so funny. Bobby Orr shares our birthday, but
really?
he like you and I was born on March 20th. But but he lost favor with me when he published I think a full page ad for Trump. He really came out big for Trump last week.
Yeah, well, he came out for me in 1983 in Central Nova, when the by-election in Central Nova, and he came down. He came down to campaign with me, and I didn't have much to do. We walked into a shopping center, and I just let him go ahead. And I walked right behind them, shaking hands. They didn't give a damn about me. But they cared a lot for him, I'll tell you. He's very admirable. I didn't know what he was up to with that thing, that endorsement of Trump last week, 2 weeks ago. But
I'm not going to send him a birthday card this year, suffice it to say.
Just send me.
I will. Let's talk about Canada and the impact on us. You know, I found that at times on social media, I heard Americans expressing frustration. Oh, you Canadians, mind your own business. No. And I always thought, how can it possibly not be our business? We are so impacted, as has the whole world been, by Donald Trump's presidency. How do you think Canada has been impacted by the past 4 years? And how do you think our situation and relationship with the States will change now if Joe Biden is indeed the eventual victor?
It'll change dramatically because, you know, I haven't said it publicly, but I've chatted with Mila a number of times about this. When these things happen, I would add them up and say to Mila, what do you think? And she'd roll her eyes. But I think that why he was defeated was the second half of what I said to you. It was the persona. It was the style, the absence of empathy. Do you remember this little vignette where the NATO leaders were gathering in Italy, I think, or somewhere, and remember that?
Yes.
The president of Montenegro, just formerly part of Yugoslavia. You could see them all walking forward, and Montenegro has 600,000 people, and so here's the new president. There's fewer people there than in Mississauga, but he was, quite proud and happy to be there. This first meeting, and he's walking up wherever the photographs were going to be taken. He's walking up, and the cameras caught Trump, who had behind him, come rushing ahead and pushed the guy aside and strutted his stuff outside. I said to Mila, when this stuff is baked in the cake, when this happens, he won't be reelected. So I think that in large measure, it wasn't because of the substance of what he did. It was because of the style, the lack of empathy, the lack of kindness, the way he eviscerated people for no reason except they disagreed with him. Look at the way he spoke. Look, being a prime minister or being president is not an easy job. And sometimes you've got to, you have to change people around in the cabinet, or you have to, even when it's a contre-cœur, that even then you do it with, try and make the guy look good on his way out. And you make a lovely statement about him. You add the adjectives. This guy has got a family. He's got a wife and many children, say, and they don't want to hear anything negative about him, nor should they. Now, look at these tremendous talents that surrounded Trump. Jim Mattis, John
Kelly, John Kelly.
John Kelly, of course. How could I forget that name? And so on. There are 4 or 5 big players. Mm-hmm. They didn't even get there. He fired some of them by internet. By tweet.
It's like breaking up with a girlfriend over Twitter.
4-star generals who have rendered enormous service. John Bolton is another one. And as soon as they get out the door, he heaps abuse on them, personal abuse. Well, Kelly, I never liked Kelly. He wasn't much of a general. He was one of the lousy generals. And this kind of stuff being said, well, what it does is it poisons the well, but it creates an image in the minds of people. And this election, it was in the minds of the independent and the women of America who said, this is too much. This president is embarrassing me and my family. And we can have a president who's tough and whatever, but you can't be mean-spirited and vile in your comments about others. And so I think that's what one of the main features of this election, Nancy, was that it got to be baked into the cake. Mm-hmm. And this was the way that the dissidents expressed their antipathy.
I guess the reason I said I felt that both parties have a lot of soul searching to do is because of all those things we've talked about Donald Trump, and the fact that he was, on live television during the debate and refused to say he repudiated white supremacy, and all of those things, and the mishandling of the pandemic, and yet the Democrats are going to squeak out if they get elected. They're going to be squeaking this out. So there's a lot of soul searching for them to do, I believe, because if you have a president who is, as Donald Trump has been, a misogynist, racist, and has so many strikes against him, and you still just squeak out a victory, it's a really, it's a conundrum politically.
Well, Trump is widely loved within his constituency. They admire him. They think he's strong. They think he's effective. And he has been in some important ways.
How much of that is because of the right-wing media? And that the media certainly has, it represents represents the same kind of divide that we see in America. And I doubt that you would have seen that kind of divide in the media when you were in politics, would you? Did you see seeds of that?
I certainly wouldn't have fueled it. But look, I tell you, just look at the numbers that came out this morning about the ratings of the various media down there on election night. Fox News had 16 million viewers for a cable network, and they had more viewers than ABC and NBC combined. Fox News.
Wow.
And of course, MSNBC and CNN were way down in the cellar compared to Fox News. Well, I can tell you this, if I had a Fox News when I was prime minister, I'd still be in office today. I don't want to alarm my opponents too much, but I say that just to indicate the power of that media, the right-wing media. Now the others are just as bad on the other side, but Fox has it. It's got the formula, and the formula is what created the cult.
Yes.
They just hang on to everything he says. They believe it, and they hang on to everything that Fox News says. And that results in an approval rating in this election of almost 49%. And we're talking about 175 million Americans who voted.
Mm-hmm.
This is astonishing. So, I was thinking one day that, maybe it's not too late for me to make a comeback. I mean, after all,
I'll be your campaign manager.
Well, when I was there, Nancy, there was the Prime Minister of Malaysia, was a very influential and effective Prime Minister. He retired, and he was out of business for about 10 or 15 years. And 2 years ago, by God, he made a comeback, and he became Prime Minister of Malaysia again. So I thought about this for a second, and I said to Mila, look, maybe I should make a comeback. And she said, well, that's a great idea. And I know your new wife would really enjoy the experience. But
yes, well,
the affection and the reverence that his supporters have for him is just unbelievable. But it's what drives the car.
Well, he's already making noise about possibly running in 2024, which suggests that he actually realizes there might be a possibility he's not going to be sitting in the White House in this next 4 years. But I can see him doing that, and I can see him continuing to stoke the fire over the term that is to come.
My guess, Nancy, is that if in 4 years he wanted to run, unless there's a dramatic change, they would draft him. He'd have no opposition. With the lamb-like, docile reactions from the other leadership of the party, he'd run over them with a truck.
That is so discouraging to think about.
He developed. You have to give him to. He came from nowhere. I say nowhere. He took on 15 senators and governors in the Republican primaries. And then he took on Hillary Clinton, who in my judgment was one of the most extraordinary people that I've met in my life and worked with in my life. And the Clintons controlled the Democratic Party totally. And Trump came on, and he defeated her. And so then he turns around heading into the next election. Biden, who was a great fellow, great guy, widely respected, and most people had an affection for him. He was slowing down a little bit, but by God, he tried to defeat him. You think you'd say after a while, look, I got elected president of the United States. I was a developer from New York. I didn't do a damn thing in public life or anything. So look, I tell you, I'm happy. There's only been 45 presidents of the United States in 240 years, and I'm one of them. And so you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to keep my reputation unblemished. And I will announce that I will not be running in this election. And I'll be the elder statesman for the rest of my life, kind of thing. No chance. No chance. If he doesn't see his picture on the front page of the New York Times, I think he has stomachache.
How much do you think his fear of being prosecuted, and do you think is that a likelihood that he's going to, is he saying, I've got to stay in office because otherwise I might end up in jail?
Well, his lawyer, Michael Cohen, was sentenced to 3 years for paying off, arranging the technicalities of paying off that young woman for certain activities. In that case, it's not widely reported. They referred to a witness or accused one or something like that. And he became an unindicted co-conspirator in this case, for which Cohen is serving 3 years in jail. He was convicted. Now, what do you think the courts are going to, the district attorney in New York, in the Southern District, is going to do with this? Here you've got two people involved in a crime. One is already in jail. A lawyer is in jail for 3 years. And what do you think they're going to do with the president, former president of the United States? Because he loses his privileges of office in certain of those areas when he's no longer there. Which raises an interesting thing. And he knows that he has to know the difficulties. And you know, he's a good father, and he's a very good family man, and he's very conscious of that would be the final indignity, the ultimate indignity. But you know, knowing him a little bit as I do, and I have much admiration for some of his achievements. But you know, I wouldn't put it past him to issue pardons on his way out. Mm-hmm. And it would be the first time in history, but
well, there was an idea, sorry to interrupt, there was an idea.
Sorry, he has the
I'm
liberty.
sorry, it's hard with Zoom sometimes.
He has the liberty of pardoning himself.
Okay, I thought he would have to, I heard at one point that he might, after the election, if they had lost, he might step down, make Mike Pence president, and then have Mike Pence pardon him. But he can pardon himself?
He can pardon himself, yeah. And he can pardon family members. The pardon power of the president of the United States is unrestrained. He can pardon whomever he wants. And I'll bet you $1 to a donut, Nancy, that sometime in late December, just around Christmas, you're gonna see some action with the old pardon pen going on.
Wow, that is just incredible. I think that I'm surprised to hear you say that you think he's a good father, but maybe I'm just so biased that would not have been my expectation. I want to ask about this sort of post-truth world we're living in because of him. So the past 4 years with Donald Trump as president, you said he told more than 22,000 lies.
Yeah, according to the Washington Post.
Yes. So how does that affect our political landscape in Canada as well as in the US going forward? All of a sudden, people are going, "Oh, you can do that and get away with it."
That, Nancy, goes, I think, to the heart of the difference between our system and theirs. Say something like, you pick your poison. Whatever Donald Trump has done, pick one of them. Mm-hmm. And say the Prime Minister of Canada did that or said that. The difference is that he goes into the Rose Garden and tells a few more tall ones, right? The Prime Minister has to go to the House of Commons every day, where he gets eviscerated, torn to shreds before the House of Commons. And it's just a matter of time when that kind of attack is launched. And with reason, with provable reason, Prime Minister would have to resign under any of these considerations. That's the beauty of the parliamentary system. It's brutal. I mean, I had to live, for example, with the Rat Pack, which I want to tell you, no piece of cake, no fun. Lots of Canadian politics, pretty brutal too. But there comes a moment as if we are under attack and the House of Commons believes that you have misled them, told lies that are provable and so on, you have to resign. You'd have to step down. In his case, he took over the media, and with the Republicans controlling the Senate, he beat the impeachment charge. And so he celebrated that. I mean, it's a terrible thing. There's only three presidents in history who've been impeached. And he was celebrating it almost to say, you see, See what the Democrats and the press have done to me? They've maligned me. They've fabricated these stories about Ukraine and China and so on. And he got away with it. He celebrated. He had a big meeting of his supporters in the East Room of the White House after just to celebrate this. And he held up the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, which said impeachment defeated, that kind of thing. Now, you wouldn't have to wonder about that in Canada. Believe me, they'd boot you out of the House of Commons and they'd boot you out of the leadership of your party. And, you'd go into, you'd try to find a little quiet bit of the forest in British Columbia, and that's where you'd spend the rest of your life pretty well. And that's the way it should be. In a parliamentary system, they have the power to do that, and they should.
You're right. It's a beautiful thing. But I have to ask, though, politics has changed. You described that brutal nature of being ripped apart on the floor of the House of Commons. But politics has changed over the 27 years since you were in office. And I think that both the nature of the vitriol within politics and the role of the media has meant that it's so hard to convince good people to go into political service, to step forward and, be in a life of service in politics. What is the answer to changing that? How do we get people, the top tier people who have not just the intelligence but also the empathy needed and the deep sense of purpose? How do we get them into office?
Well, you can see, take a guy in Toronto who works at one of the banks. He's 40 years of age. He's probably making $2 million a year or something. He comes home after watching some question period or something. He said, "Honey, I think I'm going to become a member of Parliament. I'm going to run for office." And she has just seen, read the headlines, but one after another, these young shooting stars who don't get that far, saying, "You're going to ask me and the kids? You're going to give up your job? You're living in downtown Toronto with me? We're going to do this, and you're going to go to Ottawa as an MP for $150,000 a year. I'm going to have to start taking in laundry." So
she would say what Mila said to you. I'm sure your next wife will enjoy the time with you there.
So, it's a tough sell, but anybody in politics who wants to be in politics, to be a minister or prime minister, what have you, they're not lacking in ambition and in ego, apart from me, of course, but, and that's why they do it. And in my case, I genuinely thought, after what I had gone through at StFX and the values were inculcated into us by this great university professors, I wanted to try and help shape the future of Canada. And the way to do it in our country is if you can become a prime minister or a player of importance in the party and the government, then you get a chance to help shape the future of our nation. And that's a tremendous reward that it's the highest reward that the people can give you. And so I think that those young members of Parliament, I know, for example, in Nova Scotia and elsewhere, that's why they're there. They could be doing a hell of a lot better in the private sector, but they make the sacrifices, traveling to Ottawa every other day and this kind of stuff, because they want to help Canada. They think they have an ego, which you got to have in this business. And they think that ego leads them to believe that they can make a contribution and they can make Canada a slightly better place. And when you see it happen, you have your moments, your ups and your downs in politics. At the end of the day, you're filled with gratitude for the Canadian people to have given you the opportunity, put you in that situation where you can make a difference. So I look back at my career and a lot of criticism flowing around. Even today, once they don't like you for a long time. And but I look back at everything from the Acid Rain Treaty to our fight for Mandela, to the creation of the Sommet de la Francophonie, to free trade, to NAFTA. These are not insignificant matters.
I think I'm going to interrupt you. I think it was Don Mazankowski who said that your greatest accomplishment was dragging Canada kicking and screaming into the 21st century.
Yeah, that was I think he might have been, well, he was referring to things like that, but I think
Yes.
he used to say that with regard to the original free trade debates, when I was out on the hustings and I was telling them how tough it was to get this off the ground, to negotiate with the administration and to try and set out what I thought would be tens of millions of new jobs that would come to Canada, which they have, by the way. But I was telling them how tough it was to get off the ground. And I said, at one point, my support was down to members of my immediate family. So it's an indication of you have to fight for your ideas. And if they succeed, only history can tell you that in the fullness of time. But if you fail, you get it right away.
Well,
so it's pretty tough life.
I said at the beginning of this conversation, I described you as fearless and demonstrating fearlessness in politics. And what I meant was, going up against apartheid when you were going against the US and the UK.
Yeah.
That was extraordinary. And eventually they had to, come along and say, okay,
Yeah,
I guess so. And you were an environmentalist before your time.
Yeah, well, that's true, Nancy. And but these things come around. You say to yourself, say the Mandela case.
Mm-hmm.
When I came into office, I had visitors from Desmond Tutu and the leaders of the ANC in exile because Mandela was in a jail cell for 27 years on Robben's Island. So I said to my cabinet, myself, what in the hell are we going to do? We can't sit alone atop this wonderful country and not deal with cases like, if the British are opposed and the United States are opposed and others. And my answer was, look, I've thought about that and I realize that's true. But Canada is not what they say in Quebec, a nation toothpick. What they mean is this is not a toothpick nation. Canada is a big, prosperous, sprawling, awkward, wonderful country. And we have a lot of money and we produce a lot of wealth. And what in the hell, I don't care what the others say. This is what Canada has to do. And I went into the cabinet meeting that day and I said, as of today, the government of Canada is going to place the freedom of Nelson Mandela and the destruction of apartheid apart from everything else. And we're going to govern like that. Well, all that was an ordinary Canadian like me from Baie-Comeau, educated at StFX with the tremendous values that were inculcated into us. And, the Coady Institute, which attracted me a great deal. And it was out of our lane, but, people seem to think that only the United States, or in most cases, only the Soviet Union can do these things. Because when Tutu came to see me, Bishop Tutu, to try and get Canada back in the game, one thing he said I said, well, we're a middle power. We're not a superpower. Desmond, what do you think? He said, Brian, I'm going to tell you. I am with the ANC. I've come over here to see you with the other leaders. But I'm going to tell you that what the leadership can't come from a superpower. Obviously, they're not on our side. But what they need is a country like Canada, which is a member of the G7, prominent member of the Commonwealth, a co-creator of Le Sommet de la Francophonie, which groups 49 countries in the French expression. And you're in the G7, you're a new government, and besides that, you're a white industrialized nation. And if you adopt an aggressive policy on this, you're not a smaller or black country from South Africa or from Africa somewhere. Not to disparage that, but he said, what we need is a Canada providing leadership in this thing. And you know what? He was completely right, totally right. And so we led the fight. Others were in there too, of course, Australia and Gandhi Rajiv Gandhi from India. But we're a small group who led this fight, constant fight. Bob Hawke from Australia was powerful in this. And what happened? Well, I sat in 24 Sussex with my little son, Nicholas, who was about 5 at the time. And I brought him up to my den on the second floor, 24 Sussex. And I put on the TV and I said, "Now, Nicholas, I want you to see this." It was Nelson Mandela emerging from jail, holding hands. And I said, "I want you to remember, this is a great man. And this is a terrific moment for humanity." I'm sure he didn't understand what I was trying to say, but he remembers it today. And so I'll tell you what happened. The next day, I get a telephone call from the Prime Minister's switchboard, and they say, "Prime Minister, we've got a fellow on the line here who says he's Nelson Mandela." And I said, "For God's sake, that's only pals of mine from Big Como down in the tavern." Trying to trick me into something. Well, she said, "Maybe, but he sounds an awful lot like the guy I heard on television last night." Oh, and I said, "All right, put him on." It was Mandela. And Mandela said, "When you became prime minister, I heard that a young conservative prime minister had gotten elected." I heard all this on the BBC. The one thing I could do in jail was follow on the BBC. And he said, "I'm calling to thank Canada and to thank you as prime minister for your leadership that eventually sprung me out of jail here. And we're going to get, with this, we're going to get rid of the apartheid system." And he said, "Because of Canada, I'm calling to tell you that I would be honored to be able to deliver my first speech as a free man before a free parliament in a free country in Canada." So I said, "Well, would you like me to send a plane for you tomorrow or what?" And
Is that one of your proudest moments?
yeah, I think it was. I think it was. It was and where you see that Canada's contribution, there were others involved, obviously. Canada's contribution led to this result. His successor said, without Canada, when I went to South Africa to accept their highest honor a number of years ago, the then president, his successor, said that it's terrifying, but it's appropriate to think that without the assistance and the leadership of countries like Canada and Australia and others in the Commonwealth, Nelson Mandela, who has already spent 27 years in jail, could die in jail and may have died in jail had it not been for the visionary leadership of Canada and their colleagues at the top of the Commonwealth. So
Wow.
that's the kind of thing that you remember with pride.
It seems to me there is such a, when I hear you talk about the importance at the time in your conversation, you were told, it's important that be countries that are largely white as well,
Yes.
that stand up for this. And it's really much like the conversation around racism we've had in the past 6 months.
Exactly.
That we're realizing that it can't just be racialized people fighting against racism. It has to, it's part of our responsibility as the white privileged to step up and say no.
Exactly. I was attacked bitterly by many Canadians for this and people around the world.
Really?
What the hell are you doing there? I mean, these guys are communists and they're not going to do anything for mankind. And so, look, as prime minister, you make a lot of decisions. And I made some bum ones. And I made mistakes, as we all do. But, a couple that were significant. I took a lot of abuse for them, which I deserved. But this was not a mistake. Mandela was not a mistake. Mandela, and I got to know him, and I was chairman of the board of a major media company out of Dublin. And we had all the titles in South Africa, and New Zealand and Australia and so on, apart from the stuff in Europe. So we'd go down there often to Mandela, to South Africa too. And weekends, after weekends, not every day, but every year, we'd go down and spend, after the meetings, Neil and I would spend some time with Nelson and his new wife, Grace, who was the widow of the neighboring, the fellow who was killed by the South African Air Force, shot out of the sky. Mandela, he and Winnie got divorced, as you know, very sad thing, very sad. But anyway, after that, he went on a state visit to Mozambique, and there was the widow of the former. They fell in love, and when we see them, Neil would say, "My God, they're like teenagers," But he was such a wonderful guy, and he did so much good for the world that I look back on that experience with him, and of course with my colleagues in the Commonwealth and the G7. Mitterrand was a great supporter of what we were doing in the France was, and so I look back on that with pride and say, I may have made a number of mistakes, but Mandela wasn't one of them.
Wow. Well, it's so fascinating to hear you talk about spending time with him. And I've always found it so inspiring that when he got out of prison, he said he forgave his captors. And when people were incredulous, how can that possibly be? He said, if I don't forgive them, then I am allowing them to keep me in prison. And it's such a powerful lesson. And I can't help but wonder if your role in Mandela's release, and also your response to the Ethiopian famine, where you showed such tremendous leadership, if that had its roots in your experience with Moses Cody's work and the anti-Ganesh movement at X.
I think so, and the tremendous professors I had there, and the values inculcated in me by them, and my view, I always thought the greatness of StFX. It had such a wonderful attitude that was conveyed to all of us in very elegant fashion by the professors and the administration. The first visitor that I had after my election, it happened that the Queen came and first, and then the Pope, and I thought in both those cases when I was having lunch with them, I wonder what the boys in the tavern in Bay would think of this. Pass me a boiled egg, with the big Molson, like go smud, as we used to say. But no, it was that's why the first guy that I saw, which normally I wouldn't have seen that quickly, was Eddie Gelatis from Jamaica. And of all things, because Canada and the Cody Institute had operated there, helped people, that I said, Eddie, I'm happy to see you, very happy to see you. And he said, Prime Minister, I'm very happy to see you, because a lot of the things that I learned from my ministers and living in Jamaica all my life were values that were imparted to me through an institution that you know well. And I said, what's that? He said, StFX and the Cody Institute. I put it in my memoirs. It was the first thing on that level that happened to me. So, everybody who's gone to StFX, including me, have, their life was irretrievably changed for the better by that association with StFX. And when I left the university, Nancy, I had no money. I had no influence. I had no connections whatsoever. But I had two things much better, more important. I had a degree from StFX, and I had the values that, as I say, were inculcated into me and to my colleagues by the professors and the administration of StFX. I'll tell you something else. When people say, StFX, well, that's kind of like a small university in Nova Scotia. I say, yeah. But let me remind you of something. From 1986, I believe, to 1992, or probably 93 maybe, there are 4 officers of Parliament: the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the Government in the Senate, and the leader of the opposition in the Senate. And for that almost decade, 3 of the 4 officers of the Canadian Parliament were StFX graduates. Now, this has never happened with any other university. And how good is this? A small university in Nova Scotia. I love the Maritimes. I'm a Maritimer by the baptism of desire. I went to St. Thomas College High School in Chatham, New Brunswick, and then I went to StFX. And what I learned there, I must say, that I can remember, people like Bobby Higgins, for example, who became the Liberal leader in New Brunswick. And
I went to school. I went to X with his sons.
Really?
And my sister went with his sister, with his daughter, rather.
Bobby Higgins was someone we all sought to emulate. He was a wonderful guy, and he had talent, and he was charming, but he was kind. He had a kind soul. Time for all of us. I came there when he was senior, and I was, of course, a freshman, and I didn't have a clue about anything. But we all.
I'm sorry, that's false modesty, because as a freshman,
yeah.
I was going to say you were being very humble when you said you graduated and you had your degree, I guess your X ring and your values, but you had done so much during your 4 years at StFX. You were an unusual student, and I mean that in the most complimentary way, because even in the first year at X, I think you were approached to become a part of the young sorry, that's an old bias, part of the young progressive conservatives.
Yeah.
And then you went on to be in contact through your honors thesis with Pierre Trudeau. Can you tell me just a little bit about that? I think that's a story people would be fascinated in.
Well, I was doing a thesis on the politics of Quebec for the previous 50 years, I think. And I liked doing it and I worked at it, but I wanted some comments or recommendations for things, new books and things that I should know. And I hadn't consulted. So I spoke to and wrote to a number of people. And Pierre Trudeau at the time was a professor at the University of Montreal. And he was widely admired for his views on federalism and the provincial premiers. And so he wrote me back a long letter, handwritten letter, in which he said, I would recommend, Brian, that you read this article in Le Devoir, this article or something, an essay in La Presse, and I did. And after I won the by-election in Central Nova in August of 83, I entered the House of Commons as leader. And Trudeau said to a group of the Liberal cabinet that day, he referred to the fact that we had known each other. And by that time, I'd known him for a long, long time, 30 years or something. Not well, but I knew him. And he said, Brian Mulroney wrote to me in 1958 asking for some advice. And I should have told him, join the Liberal Party.
I was thinking, I bet he lived to rue the day that he ever gave you advice.
Yeah, that's right.
That is amazing. I'm so inspired by what you've done with the Mulroney Institute of Government, and I am excited to see the students who are going to come out of there. But as I said at the beginning, it's not just about the infrastructure. The money you raised also goes to scholarships, bursaries, and this is a tough time to be going to university in a pandemic. And it's one thing for kids whose parents are able to pay the shot, but there are so many students at StFX who are in dire financial straits, and you're helping so much.
Well, I think we set aside $19 or $20 million for scholarships. And that too gives me a great deal of pleasure, because there's the buildings that'll be there, but it's the students who are going to lead the country and the world in the next years. And I hope Some of them will be from StFX. Now, in the scholarships, for example, we set aside a nice chunk of dough for Black Nova Scotian special scholarships for them, and special scholarships for Indigenous students in Atlantic Canada.
I'm so proud of that.
And I tell you that that's giving me and has given me a lot more pleasure than the building itself and the artifacts on display and that kind of, which is very nice. It's nice for StFX to have that and that lovely office, the replica of my office, exact replica of my time in office. That's great for the students and inspire. You know, I said one day that someone said, well, now, Prime Minister, you're traveling all the time on behalf of StFX, trying to raise this money and so on. Why do you do that? What do you get out of it? You know, that attitude. I said, well, I don't get anything out of it except the following. When a student, a young man or a young woman arrives with their parents to decide whether they're going to go to StFX or UNB or DAL or something, all great universities, that I hope that that young woman or young man will take a look around at this magnificent building and then see the pictures of the Kennedys with me and all of that stuff. And then the office, take a look around the Prime Minister's office, just the way it was when I was there. And they look around, and if one of them says, you know what? If this truck driver from Baie-Comeau, Quebec can do this, so can I. And that's my hope, that it'll give them a little inspiration and the knowledge that the fact that, as I say, the fact that we were relatively poor, all of us, I can't remember any rich people at StFX. And that's what the students now are in a comparable situation. And for them to get a magnificent scholarship, big scholarships, not just peanuts, big scholarships, will guarantee, I think, their success. And hopefully they will acknowledge the splendor of the education and the StFX experience, the impact that it has on young people. I hope that they will be able to translate that into not a position of power necessarily, but a position where you are placed in a spot where you can do good for people and help the reputation and the reality of Canada and the contribution that they can then make around the world. You know, you mentioned that thing. We talked about Mandela, which is a special case. But what you want is somebody who will do that. And that came about because of StFX. And my hope is that these new students, wonderful students, are coming in, and that they realize they have a privileged existence there, and they can do a lot to help both them, but when they get at it, help make a small contribution to the betterment of mankind. And with that, I'm a happy camper.
Well, that's amazing. I think contribution, if we can make a contribution in a meaningful way to our community or our country or our world, that's the path to success and happiness, not money, in my view. And but I do want to ask about money, because I understand that when you arrived at StFX, it had been the product of some sacrifice on your family's part. Is that true?
Big sacrifice. My father had to hold down. My father's an electrician in the paper mill, and we had 6 kids. And my mother took in boarders. Can you believe this?
Really?
Yeah. And that was the situation. And you know, I, like everybody who was there, I wasn't a star or a standout in any way. Everybody went through the same experience. And now, or they went through, they're judges and lawyers and doctors, and so they've advanced them and their family along the way. And so they're on a new plateau, which will enable them to give back to society, not only in financial terms, but in just with people. And so that was the object of building Mulroney Hall, and we did the refurbishment of the building next door. We totally gutted that and refurbished it, and we did these scholarships. And now with this Brian Mulroney Institute of Government, it's hard to raise money during the COVID-19 crisis, but our hope is that we will have. It's terrific for students. I get all kinds of letters from them, and the hall itself is splendid. But I'm hoping that there will be more and more as we get more and more for scholarships. The first thing that I did when I got out and started to make a little money, went out of politics, I was prime minister for $113,000 a year, and tax on that took away about 25. And I was raising 4 kids, and Mila looking after them all up there in Ottawa with about $75,000 left in after-tax dollars. So you don't go in there to get rich, but as I say, you go in there to try and shape the future of your country.
So if your father was the one who insisted that you needed to go to university and he was going to work hard to pay for it,
yeah.
What do you think his reaction, if you could walk through that building with him now, what would his reaction have been?
I think he'd have probably looked around and said, wow. And he would have said, who built this thing? Someone said, well, your son. No. This couldn't have happened in the Mulroney household because he held a second job at night. He was an electrician in the paper mill, and he would go out every night and work in people's homes, fixing their oil burners and things like that. And so I was his assistant sometimes. I was his carry around his tools and this thing, but I was not technologically oriented at all. And so that's why he said to me one night, which is reported in the building, that, Brian, let me tell you something. We could use the money, obviously, if you stayed here in Baie-Comeau and worked in the paper mill, which had guaranteed employment ad vitam aeternam for the children of employees, which is pretty damn good. It was a wonderful company, very generous. But he said to me, you see, as an electrician, he didn't have access to this thing, but he met people, the company big shots from Chicago and Montreal or Toronto. They would come and do tours of the paper mill and hold a board meeting down in Baie-Comeau. And so what my father figured out was that what all of these disparate people had in common was a university education. The president, the vice president, the this, the that, they all had a university education. And the employees, like him, didn't. And he figured that out, and it was all education. And so that's when he told me that night, Sunday night in Baie-Comeau, when he said, yeah, this is a great opportunity for you to be an apprentice here and make some money. And it would help us out a great deal. We need help. But Brian, I want to tell you, the only way out of a paper mill town is through a university door. And you are going to university. That's how I went to StFX. That's what happened.
Well, we're lucky you came through the door at StFX, that's for sure. And I guess the last thing I know, I don't want to keep you too long, and I could talk to you until midnight easily, but I do want to just get into that idea of the financial need of students, because I would love to think that some people who've joined us tonight watching will be inspired by you, as I have been, and want to contribute in some way. And one of the things that I've learned as we were preparing for tonight was in talking to people about financial need, I just feel like I've had my eyes opened. They have students who come into the financial need office who haven't eaten in several days because they just can't afford. They're living on the edge, and they alumni and some sponsors have made donations. So for instance, they have Sobeys cards that are $50 gift certificates and so on. And they can help them out and give them vouchers for the cafeteria and that sort of thing. But there is a lot of need in this pandemic. And there are a lot of students who are living on the edge and hanging on by their fingernails. And I would love to think that there will be some people watching tonight who will say, you know what, I want to buy some of those gift certificates for and help in any way, or maybe help with the access to technology, or books. Textbooks alone are so expensive. So I guess, and the other thing I should say is that bursaries, it's also important for us to have unfettered bursaries. I don't think that's the right term, but bursaries that don't have any academic necessity attached to them.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And one of the great things that Ron Joyce did, apart from his great success in business and his enormous generosity over the decades, in fact, is that when I spoke to him, and he made a very generous contribution, and he called me up later, and I'd taken him to lunch at the Toronto Club with his son, Stephen, a great guy. And he said to me, he called me up later, and he said, I said, well, thank you very much for this fantastic thing. And he said, but Brian, look, what I've learned in my charitable organizations is you can't make a donation like I did and just leave it there. I said, what do you mean? He said, students need immediate aid, not necessarily tied to academic achievement or what have you. And so I'm going to make another $2.5 million contribution to StFX, to your institute. But they're going to be bursaries for people, students like yourself and myself. When I started out, I had no money, nothing. And I hear they're going to be down at StFX and they don't have enough money, or their parents, it's imposing a great hardship on their parents back home. So I said, well, that's a wonderful idea. And I said, what do you think I should do next to take advantage of this? He said, sit in your chair in your office and wait. I'm going to send it to you today. What a great guy he was. Wonderful.
That is incredible.
So he's the one that convinced me that the bursaries program, which would have helped as I look back on it, people like myself, made it look easier on my parents and so on. So that it's there. I mean, there are hundreds of bursaries. Now that's less than some of the scholarships, obviously. Some of the bursaries, many of the bursaries are given out just like that because the students need the help. So Ron, I owe a great word of gratitude to Ron Joyce and his son and his foundation. It's just wonderful. That's when that's when you go around and you see how generous and kind people really are. And when you paint the picture for them of StFX, this little tiny university founded, I think, 164 years ago, long before Confederation, built by farmers and fishermen and clergymen in eastern Nova Scotia. And look what it is today. Look what it is today. For 6 or 7 years, when Sean was there, Sean Riley, who had a lot to do with our success in the fundraising, as did Kent. And we're very, very fortunate, the university, to have attracted such a great president as Andy. But I think that this whole idea, given the generosity of the business community and our financial institutions, and which is fantastic. You go, look, David Koch, who died, one of the Koch brothers in the States, and I knew him from Palm Beach, and we were watching a football game on Sunday afternoon, because you have to wait, you have to be careful in your timing when you ask for money. So I was just starting off with the project. So I said to David at halftime, I said, can I talk to you about I didn't have any brochure at the time and so on. Can I talk to you about the StFX? I'm on a fundraising campaign, and I'm going to need a lot of help. So he looks at me, he said, well, Brian, what is it? I said, so he took me into his den, and I'm sitting there. He said, well, what is it? I said, well, it's for StFX. And we're trying to put up, buildings and scholarships and that kind of stuff. And David says to me, look, got out his pen. And he said, I'll give you $1 million US today. And then you come back and see me when you got this thing moved along, and I'll give you some more money. And he said, what's the name of the university? I said, StFX University. He said, and where is it? I said, Nova Scotia. And he said, that's in Canada, is it? I said, as a matter of fact, David, it is. That's what it's all about. Oh. He subsequently gave me another chunk. But people are like that. People are wonderful. When they see an institution that has done so much for so many students from Atlantic Canada, from all around the world, they're going to help. They want to. You just got to make sure you get in the front door.
I think I think you've leveraged. You have made an art of relationships, and I think in politics, relationships are so important, whether between people or between countries. Yeah. And you've leveraged your relationships so amazingly for StFX, and there's so many people grateful to you for that.
Well, you're from a wonderful Nova Scotia political family. I knew your dad well and your mom, great people. And so, they were the kind of people that did so much for Nova Scotia and for Nova Scotians. And I remember them fondly. Hell, I even remember Henry Hicks.
I've told you before that my father and I had many an argument because I had no interest, even having been on television and having a profile. He thought I, had a natural path to politics and I had no interest. And he would get so frustrated and say, where does it leave us if good people won't go into politics? Where does it leave us societally? So,
well, that's what it's all about. We chatted about that earlier. And fortunately, Canada has attracted from these universities high caliber people who are willing to make the sacrifices to serve Canada. And that's what it's all about. That's what we're doing tonight. And we're trying to spread the word and the message. And hopefully people will view it as effective and beneficial and be kind and generous to us.
Well, I can't thank you enough. I so appreciate everything you've done for StFX and your willingness to spend this time with us tonight. It's been so fun for me. I don't know how I managed to get this job, but I really enjoyed it. The one thing I want to ask you is to show us the picture. Actually, I think we have it. Someone will pop it up for us. There is a picture of you and Joe Biden. That I think it's important to show that and tell that story because we didn't get to that. There's so many things. I wanted to talk to you about China. I wanted to talk to you about the environment. Look at that. Tell us about this, please.
What is he saying?
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah.
Dear Mr. Prime Minister. Now that's funny because in the States they say Mr. President, but in Canada we say Prime Minister.
Yeah.
But dear Mr. Prime Minister, I can't tell you how much your visit meant to me, Brian. I am actually putting myself in the position to contend for the nomination in 2016. May need your insight. Many thanks. I think it says, oh no, thanks, friend. Joe.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's
wow.
That's an interesting one. So I'm in Washington making a speech, and Biden reads about it in the paper. And he called me up and said, why don't you come over to the White House and see me and have lunch and let's have a chat. And that's what came up. Before I got home, back to Montreal from wherever I was going, this was on the desk at my office in Montreal before I could thank him for his kindness in all of this. And what was interesting, he didn't, the reason, are we okay?
Is that a phone call? That may be a phone call for you. Unless it's a world leader, let's ignore it.
Hang on.
This is the world we're living in, the Zoom world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what normally that would represent is somebody in the audience. It's a signal to stop talking and call it a day. But in as much as you have that picture, so the press leaves after we're in Joe's office for a little meet and greet with them before we have lunch, and Biden's about my height, just about my height, and I'm a little bit more, I guess. But anyway, when the press leave, we start to get ready to sit down, and as you may know, some of you may remember, Joe Biden had serious problems with his hair and his scalp, and he had years ago. He used to be the object of derision and humor because he had those plugs put in,
hair transplant.
No, well, I guess so, eh?
Yeah, with plugs, yeah.
Big plugs, and he looked like hell, and because he was pretty bald here, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but he thought that this kind of hurt him a little bit in public perception, and so we're sitting down. But then by now he looks good because now there are no plugs. And there's ways of doing it apparently, and Joe has benefited from it. And I've noticed in the campaign that it's much better than it was with none of those bloody plugs coming down. And so we're about to sit down for lunch, I guess. And he looks at me and he says, Brian, if I had hair like you, I'd be president of the goddamn United States of America.
Well,
and the final word, Nancy, is that he told me that he was going to run in 2016. And then in the intervening period, that was in 2014, I think, his son, Bo, died. Mm-hmm. And that was the end of his ambition for that time. And now he's come back, and it looks as if he's going to do very, very well in this. But he was a marvelous guy. He is a marvelous guy. And he's the antithesis of the present occupant of the Oval Office.
Yes, I agree with you. And I think we're all going to be watching with interest to see what happens. But if he does end up the president of the United States, it will be a beautiful hero's journey story because he has wanted that for so long. And I would like to offer, when you get invited to go back for lunch at the White House, I'll happily come and carry your bag for you.
You come with me. Joe would love that.
Carry yours and Mila's.
Yeah. He would say, Brian, why don't you sit over there? Nancy, come and sit next to me.
Thank you so much for tonight. Now, I want to thank you, but there's a better way, I think, to express our gratitude. And we have a mystery guest who's going to join us just for a moment. We are wrapping up. I know I've gone a little bit over, but I'm going to bring on this mystery guest to say thank you because I think it will be very meaningful. And our mystery guest is a first-year student at StFX. And he's a recipient, of both the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney Scholarship and the Joyce Foundation Entrance Bursary this year, as well as the Janine DeVoe Scholar as well. His name is Marcel Desmond. He's from Antigonish, and he chose to study public policy and governance at StFX. His accomplishments are already significant. Like you, he's already a shining star in his first year. He's been recognized by the Nova Scotia legislature for his commitment to create positive change in his community. He met with Barack Obama last year in Halifax when Obama visited. He led multiple initiatives around African Nova Scotian heritage, education, and culture, and he volunteers extensively while working full time. So Marcel is just showing off, is what I say. He could have attended any university, but support from the Mulroney, Joyce, and DeVoe families have made StFX his first choice. Marcel, are you there?
I am. Thank you so much, Ms. Regan.
Welcome
I'm so
aboard.
excited to be speaking with everyone.
You're a rock star.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So yeah, it seems surreal that we can get together virtually and hear from Mr. Mulroney. And in just a few short years, I too will join you and him as an alumnus of StFX. So it's so easy to picture the tangible benefits of Ms. Mulroney's generosity to StFX. After all, there's a big, beautiful building that I'm in right now to remind us of all that he's done. But I too, as you said, am a reminder of his love for StFX. I and all of the other students who are recipients of Mr. Mulroney scholarships and bursaries stand as a testament to his selflessness and commitment to providing others with the opportunities that he's had. Mr. Mulroney and I are from different places and different eras, but I hope that my path echoes his. I hope that I never go forward without looking backwards, and I never receive generosity without offering it to someone else. So Prime Minister Mulroney, on behalf of all the students bolstered by your generosity, thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
also my pleasure to announce that in honor of Mr. Mulroney's 60-year commitment to StFX, our group of alumni have stepped forward tonight with a pledge of over $50,000 towards StFX student financial aid.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
I've only been at StFX for 2 months, and it's so hard for me to fathom the ability to make such a generous gift. But it also gives me a special thrill to think that those who have gone before me, who spent 4 years on the campus and a lifetime in support of the university, who love it so much that they'll support students they don't even know, students like me. So all of us here, from all of us here to all of you out there, I just want to say thank you. Your generosity has definitely made a difference in so many of our lives and our educational journeys. So I just want to say thank you.
Well, Marcel, thank you. And thank you for that wonderful gift to the students at the university. It's what it's all about. StFX graduates and others showing the generosity of spirit to help others on a daily basis. And when I hope I live long enough, Marcel, to see you as Prime Minister or as a Governor General, or I mean, what the hell, the sky's the limit with the way you're going. So congratulations, I'm thrilled by this, and I'm very, very grateful to you and the students and the university for having helped to pull this together. It's a wonderful thing, and I hope that when you're Prime Minister, I'll still be around to vote for you.
Thank you, Mr. Mulroney.
So thank you very much. And Nancy, thank you. And Wendy, thank you very much. And Murray, thank you. And Mr. President, Andy, thank you very much. You're off to a great start. I know the challenges you've had to confront right off the bat, and you're doing a great job with the university, and you're going to bring us to a new dimension of success and appreciation by all Nova Scotians and all Maritimers in particular, but all of the rest of us across the country. So Nancy, I guess I can say good night.
Yes. Prime Minister, thank you so much. I've studiously avoided calling you what I usually call you, which is Brian. And I want to say thank you though, Brian, so much, because I'm not just saying it in terms of your professional appearance and your stories from your career, but I'm saying thank you, Brian, for your heart and your generosity and your beautiful example to all of us at StFX of giving back and helping, giving other people a helping hand. It's such an important part of who we are, I think, as Zavarians.
Well, thank you, Nancy, and my thanks to everybody, my best wishes for everybody. And I hope, if they get rid of this pandemic, maybe I'll be able to get down to Nova Scotia again. And so we'll have lunch. I'll have a lunch with everybody here. So thank you all, and I look forward to see you all soon. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Prime Minister. And thanks, Marcel, as well. Marcel, you ruined my mascara, but fortunately it was at the end of the evening. So that's okay. I'll forgive you for that, okay? I'm excited about seeing your political career too. And I know that Mr. Mulroney will no doubt offer you advice if you ever want to seek it. And I would love to have a chat too. So I'm going to drive up to the campus someday and have coffee with you at the great coffee shop there, okay?
Of
Wonderful.
course, I look forward to it.
All right. So it's time to say goodnight. Thank you so much to everyone out there for being part of this tonight. I really do feel like it just made me feel better to be amongst friends tonight. And I know a lot of people who are watching, and I hope that you enjoyed our conversation. A big shout out to our sponsors, both TD Insurance and the StFX Alumni Association. I want to encourage you, if you're inspired by what you've heard tonight and you would like to reach out and support a student or students at StFX, you might just be getting a note in your inbox tomorrow. So watch for that, okay? And that's it for us. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe. As I say to my children, and they kind of roll their eyes, but I always say, have fun, stay safe, be love. And I think that the love that we're talking about at StFX is a great example of that.
Well, Nancy, you did your usual wonderful job. And I thank you very much for it. I hope that our colleagues and friends and alumni, I hope they found it as helpful and interesting because I did.
Great. Oh, thank you so much. What fun.
Well, good luck to you, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
I don't have to say drive safely. Usually when I MC, that's what I say. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.